Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. We're diving into the impact of war on, well, everything, every aspect of human life, really. Yeah. And then we'll explore how AI could maybe potentially help us build a more peaceful future. It's a pretty interesting combo, to be honest. Some really, really heavy stuff, but also some really hopeful possibilities too. So
it's interesting. Yeah, when you think about war, you usually picture like battles and soldiers.
Right.
But it's so much more complex than that, really.
Yeah.
War impacts all of society. It's like this shock wave. It ripples through every level and just tears apart how we live, how we interact, even how we see the world.
Yeah, that's something that really jumped out at me from the research, too. It's not just about, like, who wins or loses in a battle. It's about the scars, the lasting scars that war leaves behind on men, women, young people, old people, entire cultures. Like you said, it's systemic.
Exactly. And I think one of the most striking examples of this systemic impact is how war affects men and women so differently.
Right.
Men are often like thrust onto the front lines. They're the ones facing combat, right? All the immediate horrors of that, the physical and psychological trauma.
Yeah.
But women experience a different kind of devastation.
Right. It's not like they're protected from war, are they?
No, not at all.
They become victims of violence, often in very specific targeted ways, and then they're forced to flee their homes. They become refugees in their own countries or in totally foreign countries.
Right.
And then they often become like the sole providers for their families, having to pick up the pieces while also dealing with their own trauma.
Exactly. And we see this pattern over and over again throughout history. Think about the comfort women forced into sexual slavery in World War II.
Right.
Or the horrible plight of Ukrainian women right now. They're facing displacement, violence, and the burden of keeping their families together during, just chaos.
Yeah.
It's a really stark reminder that war doesn't discriminate.
Right.
It finds different ways to just devastate people's lives.
And it's not just gender, is it? Age plays a huge role in how people experience war, too. I mean, kids especially get robbed of their childhoods and are forced to grow up way too fast, in the shadow of violence.
Yeah, the impact on children is really just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Think about child soldiers in parts of Africa forced to participate in violence that they can barely even comprehend.
Right.
Or kids just growing up in war zones, constantly surrounded by fear and trauma.
Yeah.
These experiences leave such deep psychological scars that can really affect their entire lives.
It makes you wonder how many doctors, artists, teachers are lost because a kid's potential was crushed by war. It's stealing futures, not just lives, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of loss, the impact on culture is something that really hit me hard researching all of this. It's more than just buildings being destroyed, It's the loss of shared history, traditions, all those things that make a community, all the things that tie a community together.
It's like this. Imagine someone came in and burned all your family photos, stole all your grandma's recipes, and then banned you from speaking your own language.
Wow.
That's what it's like. That sense of who you are, where you come from, just attacked at the core.
Yeah, we've seen this happen time and time again,
Yeah.
like ISIS destroying those ancient temples in Palmyra. It wasn't just about the buildings, it was about erasing history.
Right.
Saying your past never mattered.
Yeah, and then think
Yeah.
about the cultural genocide inflicted upon indigenous people throughout history.
Right.
From forced assimilation of Native American children to the destruction of sacred sites and languages.
Yeah.
It's like a deliberate attempt to wipe out an entire way of life, to sever people from their roots.
Really makes you realize how fragile culture really is.
Yeah.
And when you layer on top of all this the effects on health, the economy, the environment, the psychological trauma, it's almost overwhelming to think about.
It really is. It's this cascade of negative consequences. Think about Agent Orange in Vietnam and the lasting effects of that.
Right.
Or how economies are crippled for like generations after a major war.
Yeah.
Post-World War II, Europe, it took decades to rebuild. And even then, the psychological scars remained.
Yeah.
And then you have things like the Holocaust, where that trauma echoes down through generations.
So we've painted a pretty bleak picture here, but there's a reason we're exploring this. One of our sources, who's an AI program actually, made a really interesting point. It said that a root cause of modern warfare is the failure of leadership.
That's a powerful observation. And it really resonates with some of the things you were talking about before we started recording.
Right.
We're so used to thinking about war in terms of, armies and weapons.
Right.
But what if a lot of it comes down to bad decisions?
Yeah.
Bad management at the very top.
Yeah, that's what got me thinking, we analyze businesses that fail, why not analyze countries that fail? And it seems like this AI backs that up, right? It looked at tons of data about modern conflicts and found some interesting patterns. And one of the biggest ones was, as you said, dysfunctional leadership.
Right. And it's not just about leaders being like evil or wanting war.
Right.
It's often more subtle. It's often more about self-interest, where they're putting their own power above the well-being of their people. Or they might just be incompetent, lacking the skills and judgment to deal with these really complex geopolitical situations.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the issue of economic inequality, which the AI also flagged as a major driver of conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When there's a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots, it creates this unrest, resentment.
Yeah.
It feels like the system is rigged.
Yeah.
And that kind of environment is just ripe for exploitation by those in power who can use that anger and frustration for their own gain.
And that's where what they call the weaponization of information comes in, right? I mean, we see this happening all the time now with propaganda and misinformation being used to control the narratives, to demonize opponents, to justify aggression.
Absolutely. It's all about manipulating how people see things.
Yeah.
Creating this us versus them mentality and ultimately making violence seem like the only answer.
Yeah.
And so often there's just no accountability. Leaders who don't have to answer for their actions, who can act without consequence, are way more likely to engage in, reckless and destructive behavior.
It's like a recipe for disaster. And all of this feels so relevant to what's happening in Ukraine, right? I mean, we see a lot of these patterns playing out there.
Absolutely. While it's important to not jump to conclusions or start pointing fingers, it's clear that the AI's insights do give us a new way to look at some of the things happening in that conflict. We see an isolated leader surrounded by yes men, seemingly detached from what's actually happening on the ground.
Right.
We see the economic struggles within the nation, that simmering resentment that can be exploited, and we see that relentless propaganda machine just churning out misinformation and justifying the aggression.
And it's not just about the leaders themselves, right? The AI also talked about this feeling of powerlessness among citizens, the people who are constantly bombarded with manipulated information, who are too afraid to speak out against their government.
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
War thrives in environments where dissent is stifled, where people aren't encouraged to think critically, where they just feel like they have no control, no power to actually change the course of events. And that's exactly the kind of environment that propaganda and information control create.
So we've established that war is this multifaceted catastrophe driven, at least in part, by bad leadership and a whole bunch of systemic problems. But where does AI fit into all this? Can it really offer solutions to something this big?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. And thankfully, the AI we've been talking about doesn't just point out the problems.
Right.
It actually offers some really interesting solutions, too. It envisions a future where AI is used to build a system for everyone. A system that promotes peace and prevents conflict. Imagine like global transparency, global information sharing, where everyone has access to unbiased information and where propaganda can be effectively countered.
Okay, now that's where it gets interesting, because we've seen how much damage misinformation can do.
Oh, yeah.
But if AI could actually help us filter out the noise, help us see through the propaganda, that really changes things.
It does. And it goes beyond just countering propaganda, too. AI could actually help people from different countries connect with each other, understand each other's perspectives, build relationships based on shared interests instead of all these perceived differences.
Like building bridges instead of walls, right?
Exactly.
Using tech to connect people instead of dividing them. I like where this is going.
Me too. And AI could play a key role in predicting and preventing conflict, too.
Okay.
Imagine these early warning systems that analyze data in real time to identify potential hotspots before they turn violent. Or AI models that can simulate the consequences of different actions. They basically give leaders a chance to see what might happen, if they choose one path versus another, before they actually make those decisions.
It's like giving humanity a chance to actually think before we act, which, let's face it, we've been pretty terrible at historically.
You got it.
Yeah.
And imagine the impact AI could have on managing resources and making sure things are distributed fairly. Right now, so many conflicts are fueled by scarcity. Like everyone's fighting over land, water, food,
Yeah.
But AI could help us manage those things more sustainably, ensuring that everyone's basic needs are met. You reduce inequality, you minimize the potential for conflict.
It's about creating a world where people are focused on thriving, not just surviving, right? Where cooperation replaces competition. Now that's a world I want to live in.
Me too. And don't underestimate the power of education and critical thinking. AI could revolutionize how we learn, offering personalized educational experiences that teach empathy, cultural understanding, and the ability to really think critically about the information you're being given.
That's huge, especially with all the misinformation stuff we talked about earlier. If we can actually teach people how to think for themselves, to question what they see and hear, that's a powerful antidote to propaganda.
It really is. And it's not just about, spotting fake news. It's about this deeper understanding of different cultures, different perspectives, so that people aren't as susceptible to, the fear-mongering and the demonization that often leads to conflict.
Okay.
And finally, AI could contribute to better governance and accountability. Imagine systems that could monitor the actions of leaders in real time, providing transparency and feedback to citizens, making sure those in power are actually serving the people they represent.
It's about creating a world where power is more balanced, where leaders are held responsible for their actions, and where citizens have more say in shaping their own destinies.
Exactly.
This AI-assisted world is sounding pretty amazing so far, but I'm curious, can you actually, paint me a more concrete picture? What would daily life actually look like in this future?
Well, imagine you wake up every morning and you have access to unbiased news and information from all over the world. And you can actually trust what you're reading.
Okay.
Because AI is constantly fact-checking and filtering out the propaganda and the spin.
Honestly, just that alone would be a huge relief.
Yeah.
No more echo chambers, no more constantly wondering who to believe. It'd be like a breath of fresh air for the internet.
I know, right? And when it comes to things like, resources, imagine things are much fairer. AI is making sure everyone's basic needs are met, reducing poverty, inequality. So you have access to affordable, nutritious food, clean water, reliable energy. You're not constantly worried about scarcity or, just struggling to survive.
That kind of stability, man, that would do wonders for reducing all the tension, all the conflict, right? When people feel secure in their basic needs, they're less likely to, resort to desperate measures.
Absolutely. And imagine healthcare that is actually efficient and accessible thanks to AI. AI-powered diagnostics, personalized treatment plans.
Okay.
You could get the care you need when you need it without having to worry about crazy costs or these long wait times. And because AI is helping us manage resources sustainably, the environment is healthier too. The air is cleaner, water is cleaner, climate is more stable. It's
a world where people can focus on living fulfilling lives,
right,
pursuing their passions, contributing to their communities, rather than just struggling to survive. That's a powerful picture.
Yeah. And because AI is fostering cultural understanding and empathy through things like education and global communication, people actually feel more connected to each other, regardless of backgrounds or beliefs. So you're more likely to see someone from another culture as a neighbor, a colleague, a friend, rather than some stranger or a threat.
It's a world where we're cooperating, we're collaborating. It replaces fear and all that division, where we're all working together to actually solve problems rather than fighting over, whatever scraps we can get. I'm starting to think this AI might be onto something.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think maybe even more importantly, there's a sense of hope and optimism about the future. People believe that conflict can be solved peacefully, that we're all in this together, and that we have the tools and the smarts to actually create a better world.
Okay, so this all sounds incredibly promising, but I'm curious, can we get down to, the nuts and bolts? What can AI actually calculate when it comes to predicting and preventing conflict? It's one thing to, talk about these big ideas, but how does it actually work?
Well, first of all, AI can analyze these huge data sets from tons of sources, economic indicators, trends on social media, political speeches, historical records, even environmental data.
Wow.
It sifts through it all and picks out patterns that we might miss, patterns that indicate a rising risk of conflict.
So it's like identifying those potential flashpoints, before they explode, like a global early warning system.
Exactly. And it can do more than just predict. AI can also figure out the impact of different policies on conflict risk.
Mm-hmm.
For example, it could model how a specific trade agreement might, increase or decrease tensions between two countries.
Oh, interesting.
Or how a development project might affect stability in a region.
Okay. That's incredibly valuable information for policymakers.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like having a crystal ball that can actually show them the consequences of their decisions, help them make more informed choices.
Exactly. And speaking of decisions, AI can also figure out how effective different conflict resolution strategies are. So it could analyze historical data, right, to determine which approaches have actually been the most successful in the past, and then suggest tailored solutions for current conflicts, taking into account the specific circumstances.
So AI could actually help us learn from our mistakes and maybe not repeat them. That would be nice for a change.
It would. And don't forget about misinformation.
Right.
And how it fuels conflict.
Right.
AI can track the spread of all that propaganda and disinformation, analyze its impact on public opinion, and it can even help come up with counter-narratives that are actually based on, facts and evidence.
So it's like fighting fire with fire.
Yeah.
But we're using information as the weapon instead of violence. It's about using technology to promote truth and understanding instead of lies and division.
Exactly. And, as climate change keeps contributing to scarcity and displacement, AI can actually model the potential for future conflicts that arise from these environmental pressures. So it can help us understand how climate change is going to make things worse, how it's going to create new flashpoints, so that we can actually try to prevent them,
A little bit scary to think about.
Yeah.
But also a really important thing to understand.
Absolutely. And one last thing AI can do, it can analyze psychological profiles of leaders to figure out if they're likely to resort to violence or aggression.
Right.
Now, it's not about predicting the future with like 100% certainty,
right,
but it's about identifying those who might pose a higher risk and then taking steps to try to reduce that risk.
That's fascinating, but also kind of unsettling.
I know.
Like, can we really predict someone's actions based on their personality?
Well, it's not really about predicting the future perfectly. It's more about understanding what might happen.
Right.
And trying to prevent it. It's like early intervention. It's about understanding what contributes to violence and using that knowledge to create a more peaceful world.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've gone from talking about the terrible effects of war to the potential for AI to actually build a more peaceful future. And wow, what a journey so far. But before we dive even deeper into this, we need to talk about the potential downsides, because every tool, even a powerful one, has its risks, right?
Of course, we have to be realistic
about
the challenges, the potential pitfalls of using AI for peace. It's a powerful technology, like you said. And like any powerful technology, it can be misused.
Right.
We have to think really carefully about the ethics, about how to prevent things we didn't intend, and how to make sure that AI is used for good, not for bad.
Yeah, that's a whole other level of complexity, and one that we definitely need to explore, right? So for everyone listening, stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll unpack the ethical stuff, the potential risks of using AI for peace, and what we can actually do to make sure this technology is used responsibly. It's a conversation that everyone needs to be a part of.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to our deep dive into AI and its potential for a more peaceful world. As we discussed in the first part, AI offers some really exciting possibilities for predicting, preventing, and even mitigating the devastating impacts of conflict. But we also need to be aware of the potential downsides, right? We can't just assume technology will solve everything.
Right, exactly. I mean, we've already seen how tech can be used for good and bad.
Yeah.
So before we get too carried away with the AI will save the world idea, we need to talk about the potential risks.
Yeah.
The unintended consequences. What are some of the things that worry you?
Well, one of the biggest concerns with AI, especially when we're talking about something as complex as peace and conflict, is bias. AI systems are trained on data, massive amounts of data.
Right.
And if that data reflects existing biases in our world, well, those biases can get baked into the AI's decision-making processes.
So it's like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, pretty much.
If we feed the AI biased information, it'll spit out biased results.
Exactly. And the scary part is those biases might not always be obvious. It's not always as simple as an AI explicitly saying, group X is bad. It could be a lot more subtle.
Can you give us an example? Make it real.
Sure. Imagine an AI system that's, designed to predict future conflicts. If it's trained on data that mostly reflects conflicts started by, let's say, countries with certain political systems, well, it might start to see those systems as inherently more likely to cause conflict, even if the current situation is totally different.
So it's like judging a book by its cover.
Yeah.
just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it'll always happen that way.
Exactly. And this bias can show up in other areas too, like resource allocation. An AI might unknowingly prioritize aid for certain communities over others, simply because that's how it was done in the past, even if the needs have changed. It's like perpetuating those inequalities, even if we have the best intentions.
Okay, so that's pretty worrying. What can we do about it? Can we actually make AI systems that are, like, truly fair and impartial?
It's a tough challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. I think the key is to be aware of that potential for bias from the very beginning. When we're training these AI systems, we need to make sure the data we're using is as diverse and as representative as possible.
So it's like a good recipe needs a variety of ingredients. A
Yeah.
good AI needs a variety of data.
That's a great way to put it. We need to include data from different cultures, different socioeconomic groups, different political viewpoints. We need to make sure the AI is getting a full picture of the world, not just a little slice.
And it's not just about the data itself, right? It's also about who's actually building these systems. Who's making the decisions about how they're designed and used.
Oh, absolutely. We need diverse teams of developers, researchers, people from all different backgrounds, disciplines, different ways of thinking. Because if everyone building AI comes from the same background, has the same worldview, well, that's going to be reflected in the technology they create.
So it's not just about technical skills. It's about having a wider lens, bringing in all those different perspectives.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of transparency. We need to be able to actually understand how these AI systems are making decisions.
Yeah.
It can't just be like this magic black box where we put in data and get an answer out without knowing how we got there.
Yeah, otherwise how can we trust it, right? How can we be sure the AI isn't, like, making decisions based on bad logic or hidden biases?
Right, exactly. We need to be able to audit these systems. To see what data they're using, to understand the algorithms they're running, and to make sure the process is fair and accountable. It's like having a show your work policy for AI.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about bias, we've talked about transparency. What other potential dangers do we need to be thinking about here?
Well, another big one is misuse. Just like any powerful tool, AI can be used for good or for evil. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized, used to, increase surveillance, suppress dissent, even automate violence.
That's a scary thought. We've already seen how algorithms can be used to spread misinformation, to manipulate people.
Right.
Imagine that same power being used to escalate conflicts or even target certain populations.
Exactly. Think about an AI system that's, designed to identify potential threats. It could be manipulated to target individuals, unfairly target them based on their ethnicity, their religion, their political beliefs. Or an AI that's supposed to prevent conflict, it could actually be used to justify preemptive strikes. Maybe to escalate tensions based on, faulty data or biased interpretations.
It's almost like those dystopian science fiction stories where technology becomes this tool for oppression.
Yeah.
A tool for control.
It's not that far-fetched, unfortunately. And the scary part is this misuse doesn't even have to be intentional. Even well-intentioned AI systems can have consequences we don't intend. An AI that's designed to predict conflict could actually end up making conflict more likely. Like, it could create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, if an AI predicts that conflict is likely in a certain region, countries might start taking these preemptive actions. They might, beef up their military presence on the borders, maybe cut off diplomatic ties. And those actions could actually increase the risk of conflict, even if the AI's initial prediction was based on bad or incomplete data.
So the AI's prediction could become the trigger for the very thing it was trying to prevent.
Exactly. It's like a classic example of how complex systems can behave in ways we don't anticipate. We just have to be really careful about how we use these tools and always be thinking about what could go wrong.
Okay, so how do we prevent that? How do we prevent AI from becoming a tool of, oppression or from accidentally making things worse?
Well, it starts with some clear ethical guidelines, some regulations. We need to establish some international norms for how we develop and use AI, especially when we're talking about something as sensitive as peace and conflict. It's not about stifling innovation.
Right.
It's about making sure AI is used responsibly, that it benefits everyone.
It's like having rules of the road for AI, right? Making sure everyone's playing by the same rules, that we're all working toward the same goal.
Exactly. And these guidelines, they have to have some teeth, right? We need a way to hold actors accountable if you break the rules, whether it's governments, corporations, individuals. It might mean creating these international oversight bodies, developing new auditing tools, monitoring tools, and having clear consequences if those rules are broken.
So checks and balances for AI.
Right.
Making sure no one has too much power, that everyone is using using the technology responsibly.
Precisely. And I think beyond regulation, we also need to foster a culture of ethical AI development.
Okay.
That means teaching developers about the potential downsides, about the unintended consequences of their work.
Right.
It's about instilling this sense of moral responsibility in the people who are creating these tools.
So it's not just about writing the code, it's about thinking about what that code is actually going to do in the real world.
Yes, exactly. And we need to involve the public in this conversation too. We need to be talking openly and honestly about the ethics of AI, the potential benefits and risks, and how we want to shape this technology as a society. It can't just be a discussion that's happening behind closed doors at, tech companies or government agencies.
It's about democratizing AI.
Yeah.
Making sure that everyone has a voice in how this technology is developed and used.
Exactly. And speaking of democratizing AI, there's another ethical issue we need to address: the concentration of power. If the development and control of AI is only in the hands of a few, powerful nations or corporations, it could make existing inequalities even worse. It could create these new forms of digital colonialism.
So instead of promoting peace, AI could actually become a tool for just maintaining the status quo, with, the powerful staying in control.
That's the danger. Imagine a world where only a handful of countries have access to sophisticated AI systems that can predict conflict, that can manage resources, influence public opinion. Those countries would have a huge advantage. And they might be tempted to use AI to get what they want at the expense of less powerful nations.
It would be like this new arms race, but with algorithms instead of weapons.
Right, exactly. And this concentration of power could also stifle innovation. If only a small group of people are driving AI development, we might miss out on valuable insights and solutions that could come from more diverse perspectives.
So how do we prevent that? How do we make sure that AI for peace is developed and deployed in a way that helps everyone, not just the powerful?
Well, one way is to promote open source development and collaboration.
Yeah.
That means making AI algorithms and data sets public, encouraging researchers and developers from all over the world to work together, and just fostering a culture of sharing knowledge.
It's like creating a global commons for AI.
Yeah, exactly.
Where everyone can contribute, everyone benefits. No one gets left behind.
That's it. We also need to invest in building capacity in developing countries, providing resources, training to help those nations develop their own AI expertise, so they're not left out of this.
It's about empowering all nations to use AI for peace, not just a select few.
Precisely. And this empowerment needs to go even further. It needs to go to individuals and communities as well. We need to make sure that everyone has access to AI education and training, no matter their background, no matter their socioeconomic status. It's about leveling the playing field for AI literacy. It's about giving everyone a chance to understand and shape this technology.
So we're talking about a multi-pronged approach here: individual education, responsible development practices, international cooperation, making sure access is equitable. That's a lot.
It is. But remember, the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're creating together through the choices we make, the actions we take, the conversations we have. The more we understand the potential and the risks, the better equipped we'll be to shape a future where this technology actually helps build a more peaceful world.
Okay, so we've laid out some of the challenges. Now let's talk solutions. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some specific things that individuals, communities, and governments can actually do to harness the power of AI for good, and how to actually address the concerns we've talked about today.
Stay tuned. It's about to get even more interesting.
Welcome back, everyone. So we've covered a lot: the devastating effects of war, the potential for AI to help us build a more peaceful future, and all those ethical things we have to consider along the way. It's been a lot.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind.
Right.
But that's kind of the reality of this whole AI and peace thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not a simple problem.
Right.
It's not like we can just create some algorithm and expect it to fix everything.
Exactly. And to be honest, that's kind of what I'm struggling with. It feels so huge. Like, yeah, AI could help, but what can I, as one person listening to this, actually do? It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I get that. But change rarely happens overnight. And it rarely comes from, just one person saving the day.
Yeah.
It's about a lot of people taking small steps, within their own little worlds, and those ripples eventually add up.
Okay, so what are some of those small steps? Like, where do we even begin?
Well, the first step, and this might sound obvious, but it's education. We need to learn about this stuff, right? We have to equip ourselves with the knowledge to understand this whole complex landscape. That means learning how AI works, what it can and can't do, the different ways it's being developed.
So like taking an online course, maybe reading some articles, listening to, I don't know, a certain AI-themed podcast.
There you go. You're already on the right track. There's so many great resources out there, from, beginner stuff to really in-depth analyses. And the more you learn, the better you'll be able to really participate in those important conversations, about AI and how it's affecting society.
So it's like we're building up our AI literacy.
Exactly.
So we're not just, passively using this technology, but actually shaving it.
Exactly. And that leads to the next step, which is advocacy. Once you have that knowledge, you can start thinking about how to, how to encourage responsible AI development within your own communities and networks.
Okay, so what does that look like? Give me some examples.
Well, it could be something as simple as just talking to your friends and family about these issues, just raising awareness. Or you could support organizations that are promoting ethical AI development. There are a lot of great groups doing some really amazing work out there.
And what about getting involved politically? Does that make a difference?
Absolutely. Go to town hall meetings, contact your elected officials, let them know you're concerned about AI and that you expect them to keep people's well-being in mind when they're making decisions about this technology.
So it's about taking what we know and actually doing something with it, making our voices heard, from like our dinner tables to the halls of government.
That's it. And it might seem small, but trust me, it all adds up. Now, let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about individual action, but what about governments and those big international organizations? They have to be a part of this too, right?
Yeah, for sure. They're the ones who can create regulations, set standards, and, really encourage global collaboration. They can't just sit back and wait for the tech industry to figure it all out.
Exactly. So we need to hold them accountable, right? We have to push for transparency about how AI is being used by government agencies, advocate for regulations that prioritize human rights and ethics, and support international initiatives that are trying to prevent an AI arms race.
Yeah, that last one's a big one. We've seen what happens when countries start competing to develop the most powerful weapons.
Oh, yeah.
We can't let that happen with AI. It's too dangerous.
You're absolutely right. We need international agreements, like treaties or conventions, something that specifically addresses AI and how it relates to peace and security. We need rules that'll prevent the weaponization of AI, rules that'll ensure that humans are still in control of these autonomous weapon systems. And we need to make sure that AI is used for good, for everyone's benefit, not just for nationalistic agendas.
It's almost like we need a Geneva Convention, but for AI.
Right.
A set of rules that everyone agrees to follow to make sure this technology is used responsibly.
That's a great analogy. And while those international agreements are super important, let's not forget about the private sector. They're the ones who are actually building these AI systems.
Right.
They have a huge responsibility here.
Yeah, they can't just be chasing profits, ignoring all the potential consequences, right?
Right. They have to be a part of the solution. And there are a few ways to make sure that happens. We need to encourage and maybe even demand clear ethical guidelines for AI research and development. We need to advocate for more diverse teams working on these projects so we get a wider range of perspectives. And we should support companies that are actually committed to using AI for good. Companies that are transparent about how they do things and accountable for their actions.
So it's about using our power as consumers, too.
Yeah.
Choosing to support the companies that are doing things the right way and holding the others accountable.
Exactly. Every time you buy something, every time you use a service or invest in a company, you're making a statement about what you value. And those choices, together, they have a huge impact.
It all comes back to that idea of collective action, doesn't it? Individuals making informed choices, governments setting ethical guidelines, the private sector stepping up and taking responsibility. We all have a role to play.
That's right. It's not about waiting for someone else to fix things. It's about recognizing that we are the someone else. And, stepping up to do what we can wherever we are with whatever we have.
It's a little daunting when you lay it all out like that.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of empowering, right? Knowing that we're not just bystanders, that we can actually make a difference.
Exactly. And remember, this is just the beginning. AI is still being developed, which means we have a real chance to shape where it goes from here. We can choose to use this technology to build a better world, a more peaceful, just equitable world. Or we can let it be used to just make existing problems worse and create new conflicts. The choice is up to us.
Powerful stuff. So for everyone listening, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep pushing for a future where AI is used for good, because ultimately the future is what we make it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
I agree. It's been great talking about all of this with you.
This is DigitView.